Okay, it's recording now, isn't it? Yes. Okay, excellent. So, once again, welcome everybody on behalf of the Biomaterialities Research Group and also the editorial team of this beautiful book, which we are talking about today, De-Automating the Future. And I would like to begin by saying a few words about the research group which is located at the Humboldt University of Berlin, and also about the collection, and then we will hand over to a discussion of the contributors. So we are firstly of all very happy that so many of the contributors had time and chose to join us today. It's really a pleasure. And we'll give them a chance to introduce themselves in just 2 or 3 minutes. But let me say a few things about the group and also the book project. So the group is a 5-year research project, and it focuses on the high-tech bioeconomy. And as a team, we work from political ecology, political economy, and STS perspectives primarily. And one of the things that we are particularly interested in is, of course, a critical view of technology, and including automation, AI, things like that, for instance, in agriculture, but also in other areas. And that is why we also decided to host this book launch, even though the book itself actually precedes my work in the group. So the book started from an idea that Marlon and Jesse and I had, where we noticed that there's a lot of critical and not so critical discourse coming from a broadly leftist, sometimes Marxist perspective on technology and automation. So Paul Mason would be one example, Aaron Bastani would be another example, Aaron Beninoff would be another one, and yeah, there's quite a few also since we started working on the book. And we wanted to kind of add our critical perspective on that. And then secondly, it also comes from a longstanding interest in Marxism and in debates that discuss the question whether Marx was a technical determinist, whether he was a Promethean, and so on. And that's been a long-standing debate, both within Marxist debates and also a charge that has been carried towards Marxist approaches to technology for a very long time, for instance, by the Green Movement. And we thought that there is certainly some truth to that, but it's not the entire story. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to launch a open call for abstracts, and then went through the abstracts and picked the ones that seemed the most interesting. And I'm very happy to say that we ended up with a bunch of really excellent chapters, I think, if I can say so myself as the editor. Okay, so as I said, I would like to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. As I said to you in an email, please be very, very brief because we don't have a lot of time. So maybe 1 or 2 sentences about who you are and 1 or 2 sentences about what your contribution to the book was. And I would suggest that we go by the order of the book, which would be Jason first, Jason Dossi.
Well, thanks very much, and thanks to Johannes and Marlon and Jesse for all the work they did on this. This is really a pleasure for me. So, just a very brief intro. Um, Jason Dawsey. Since the volume came out last summer, I transitioned from a job at the National World War II Museum to a position in history at Arizona State University. My chapter deals with, as a historical chapter that deals with Herbert Marcuse and Gunther Anders, so two German Jewish left-wing critics of technology, longtime friends. And I use a perspective I really learned from my advisor, Moise Postone to kind of critically approach these two perspectives and how they tried to make sense of automation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Then next we have Jason Smith. Jason can't be here with us today, unfortunately, because he was busy otherwise, but he contributed a chapter, Nowhere to Go, Automation Then and Now, where he basically looks very critically at the idea that automation is really kind of a labor-saving technology, and that's also kind of the direction that Chris wrote about. So you're next.
Hi, thank you for hosting. Yes, my name is Kristina Gratorp, and I have an engineering background, and then I had a midlife crisis. So now I'm doing a PhD in environmental and energy system studies in Sweden. And I wrote the chapter that's named Time to Automate, the hidden labor of automation. And that's basically what the chapter is about.
Okay, thank you very much. Then Benjamin Ferschli wrote this morning that he is sick, unfortunately, so he also can't be here. And he, what his chapter does is it looks again at the labor theory of value and looks at the question of whether it is possible to fully automate or not. And his argument is that it isn't, in fact, because if there were full automation, then there would be a value crisis. After that, we have Amy.
Hi, so I'm Amy Wendling. I'm a philosopher. Like Christina, I had a midlife crisis, and now I help run an arts and sciences college. It's glorious, actually, because the chemistry is right there, and the mathematics is upstairs. I enjoy that work, but I also enjoy this work. I never thought before so clearly about the skill concept. As a philosopher, we have only one game, right? What is X? How does it work? And after all these years of thinking about de-skilling, I thought, like, well, what is skill? And so the chapter really addresses some mobility in the skill concept.
Thanks very much. Then we have Jeff.
Back-to-back philosophers. I'm Jeff Noonan, professor of philosophy at the University of Windsor. And my chapter has kind of two goals. The first is to sort of think through the ambivalence in Marx's own work between a kind of post-work perspective, full automation, and a non-alienated labor perspective on what socialism would be like. And I come down in the non-alienated labor section interpretation. I criticize people like Bastani and Cernacek and Williams, arguing essentially that socialism is about social individuality and the way we become real for other people and contribute to the collective as well as our own individual meaningful lives is through non-alienated labor.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Then we have Larry.
Hello, I'm Larry Liu, based at Morgan State University in the sociology department, and my empirical contribution was about the transformation of the retail sector, automation in the warehouse, looking at the deployment of robotics and other automation systems in Amazon, and the effects that it has on the work experience, including de-skilling, surveillance, precarious labor, as well as the push towards labor organization. And I just picked off the numbers of the robot Amazon warehouses, which increased from 350,000 to 750,000 in the last 2 years. That's a 114% increase. And the employee count went from 1.6 to 1.5 million. That's a 5.5% decrease. So that's just for the context.
Thank you very much. And next is Steffen.
Hi, my name is Steffen Reitz. I'm based in Frankfurt, Germany. I'm a part-time public school teacher, part-time researcher, sometimes union activist, I guess. I wrote the article Automation Along Global Supply Chains, How RFID Systems Will Transform Work and Power Relations in the Supply Chain of Fast Fashion. I did this together with a colleague from the Thai network who tried to organize workers along the supply chain of fast fashion. And they wanted to know, they had experienced RFID in the different stores where they had the workers experienced that it had changed working conditions a lot. And they knew that RFID was going to get implemented in the whole supply chain. So they wanted to know how that would change working conditions and power relations in the supply chain. And I tried to find out more about that. That was my project.
Okay, excellent. Then we have Robert.
Hi, everyone. Just like Stefan, I'm also a part-time, full-time faculty member at San Jose State University and several other places in California and the United States. And I wrote the chapter about how algorithmic management and automation is being used to discipline academic labor by breaking down what we do into its component parts, or what Braverman called the rationalization of labor. And I combined Marx's approach to looking at the impact of machines as a response to class struggle, and combine it with Foucault's idea of disciplining labor. And since we're all academics, it's very much a worker's inquiry into the work that we're doing and how it's changing, so that, like Stefan, I'm a union activist, so I'm looking at what are the tactics and strategies we can develop to respond to this. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, great. And then we have Jens Schröter, who also couldn't make it, unfortunately, who wrote about the automation of artistic labor and how that's working or not working. He is, yeah, it's a pretty interesting chapter. I won't say more. And then lastly, we have James on behalf of, yeah, I guess you'll say that yourself, of 3 people.
Yes, thanks. I'm James Steinhoff. I'm assistant professor in the School of Information and Communications Studies in University College Dublin in Ireland. And I am representing myself and my 2 co-authors, Nick Dyer-Rutherford and Atla Mikola Kiosin. We wrote the chapter Stagnation, Automation, and the Abyss, or something like that. And the point of the chapter was to do 2 things. One was to advance an automation-centric version of Marxism theory against Marxist stagnation theorists, and to say that actually it's not an either-or situation. And in fact, we argue that automation is the automation theory is consistent with stagnation theory. It's just actually automation of circulation, primarily, rather than automation in production, as you might expect from Marxism. And we also take the opportunity there to take up the sort of esoteric thesis that we made at the end of the book Inhuman Power, about the idea of automation having an apotheosis of sorts, and the idea that machines could be proletarianized, and that could be consistent with rather orthodox Marxism, actually. Yeah, and I would just note that Jeff Noonan did introduce me to Marxism in a master's class many moons ago.
So I'm much older than I look.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for introducing yourselves. And again, we're very happy to have you all on board in this volume. So this means we can begin with a discussion, and we will ask a number of questions to the contributors. And then ideally at some point, we will also open the Q&A to the members of the audience, and we'll let you know. So Johannes already pointed out that this has been in the works for quite a while. And I think we initially began talking about this sometime after the Jesper Burns, Alberto Toscano debate had taken place, I think, which is one of those instances that Johannes mentioned in which Marxists are basically discussing the role of the productive forces, the role of the relations of production, and what actually should have theoretical and maybe political primacy, and what this means for the idea of transition to socialism. And then this is, as Johannes pointed out, a long-standing debate. In the introduction, we quote Louis Althusser, who once wrote that you could write a history of Marxism by considering the answer given to this question. That is, whether one should assign priority to the relations of production or the productive forces. And after 150 years and more of debate, this hasn't been settled. And it keeps being controversial enough that Marxists and others fight about this. And just recently, a writer associated with Jacobin magazine, Ben Burgess, he tweeted that he still holds the belief that Marx believed in the historical primacy of productive forces and had a deeply techno-optimistic view of socialism. And I don't think that Burgess's tweet was provided any very strong or novel arguments, but the interesting thing is that it very quickly generated a series of replies and retweets and subtweets and all that, in which people challenged this interpretation. And now we thought we might begin our collective discussion by asking you why you think, or if you think, that it matters both theoretically and politically to get this question right, if it can be gotten right, basically. But first of all, why do we still fight about this question? What has priority, the relations of production or the productive forces?
Are we just going to leap in, or okay? I mean, two quick things. I mean, I think first, it shows that one can't conduct complex theoretical arguments in tweets. But I mean, to the substantive question, I think it's clear Marx wrote a lot of stuff, 50 volumes, him and Engels. He was ambivalent about what socialism would be. He didn't know what socialism would be concretely. But also, and here's why it's important, the most complex machine in Marx's day was a steam shovel. Right, we're dealing with artificial intelligence that's $500 billion investment, according to people yesterday in the States, that can replace potentially professors, poets. I'm not saying it's going to be a great poet or a great professor, but we're reaching a point where the development of technology is challenging in a very deep way what we are, and if socialism concerns what we want to be. Right, one has to come up with 21st century answers to that question. We can learn from Marx, but I don't think you can textually resolve that ambivalence. But he's also a creature of the 19th century, right? I mean, he's very clearly excited by technology, and who wouldn't be if it's going to get people out of a coal pit? But we're in a very different technological space right now.
Please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Jason. I mean, yeah, if I had to choose, yeah, sure, I would say yes, it still has the primacy. Insofar as I'm a value form theorist, then I think the value form is generated, is there, because the relation, the concrete changes are substantial, like Jeff said, but not substantial enough yet to modify the formal relations. I mean, maybe once you have, a God level large language model that is like a autonomous linguistic agent, I think that would actually change the concrete productive forces such that then that would have massive ramifications. But right now, as advanced as AI is, I don't think it's actually done a significant enough change to the productive forces to launch system-wide ramifications.
Yeah, I'll jump in, here as well. And I guess my answer is somewhat similar to Jeff's, in that because of there are real ambivalences, I think, in Marx's own writings about these things, and I think the introduction to the volume does take a lot of this up. There's not clear-cut answers. There's not only the issue about the lack of clear-cut answers, in that there's such a long history that's come about since Marx, not only in terms of massive technological revolutions, but in terms of relations of production, the history of class struggle since Marx's own day, and about the kind of waxing and waning of socialist, communist, workers' movements since the late 19th century. And I think that one of the things this volume does, and does well, is I think it really does push people, all of us, anyone interested in this topic, to think more rigorously about what about Marxist approaches to these things, and I think, for my part, hopefully approaches that can inform a renewed socialist politics, and that some clarity about these things, even if there's no, okay, we now know exactly what Marx thought, but actually shedding some light on the ambivalences still can be really helpful for a renewal of the left.
Yeah, the one point I would like to add is that regarding the artificial intelligence discussion, that there are some groups I perceive that are much more concerned about it. At least from the online forums, the Reddits that I kind of follow, it is especially like the software engineers. The people that we kind of say that they have the most stable kinds of employment in the AI era. There's I perceive to be a much greater trepidation than subjectively than you could say in the broader labor market, and that might say that AI is not very advanced yet. I mean, or it could mean that that the engineers know something that the rest of us don't.
I mean, on that note, Larry, I mean, I've researched data scientists and general high tech like industry workers, and one of the interesting things that I found there is that for these people, for anyone who does software work, software production, automation is a daily, a quotidian fact. It's something that they do. They automate their own work. That's how software work works. You write scripts to automate tasks that you do. And so you automate yourself continually. And that's kind of the nature of software production. I think that's a unique and interesting thing about that kind of work.
Just to bring us back to the question, that not that we're not on it, but about the forces of production and the formal relations of production, I grow less interested. Right. So I understand the stakes, and I understand it as this enduring, repetitive feature of a debate. Maybe it's so much Hegel for so many years. It seems like I want to say, though I can't remember what I said in print at any particular decade, that there are some permeability between those categories too.
Yeah, and if I add one more point, I mean, on James' point, I guess yes. I mean, they are the software engineers. They're automating their own work, but I think the generative AI question. I mean, the debates we have in higher education among our faculty is they're telling us hey, you should be using GAI in your work, and your students will probably also be integrating it into their work. And it will get to a point where you're kind of like, well, do we need to have the human level instruction? And so, it is really the spread of this, automation logic, I think, in the broader, you could say, labor market that's going to be, really interesting to follow.
Yeah, it's kind of a test case to see the question of the primacy of the productive forces, and if Gen AI actually will become a productive force, or whether it will just tank before it does, which seems viable. So they can't seem to turn a profit on it right now. So it may be hard to found a new mode of production on that. So maybe we'll never get to see if it demonstrates the primacy or not.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I mentioned that what I want to stress is something that I find very important, and that the three of us also try to argue for in our introduction, and that is that it seems to be kind of a hopeless endeavor to find the one correct answer to this question in Marx's works. And right, given all the changes, the transformations, the theoretical epistemological breaks and what have you. And I just wanted to mention Amy's work in her 2009 book. I think it is read Karl Marx on Technology and Alienation, which traces some of these shifts very well. So I think that's basically important to note that this has been researched already. Perhaps the question might not be as interesting as you suggested, Amy, in the end. Or we could still, something that I continue to be interested in is why people care so much about this. Sometimes it seems that some people seem to feel that if kind of the development of productive forces is not working towards our goal in the background, we would need to lose faith in socialism, which I think would be kind of a horrible conclusion to draw. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, or maybe on what the stakes are. Why do we want one version or the other as Marxists, as people interested in socialism?
I mean, again, when Marx is writing, scarcity was a real problem. I mean, I think the problem today is arguably the hypertrophy of the productive forces. We have too much. The problem is distributing the wealth that's already produced. Like, honestly, what do human beings lack? I mean, think of this $500 billion investment that they were talking about yesterday, whether it comes to pass or not. This is going to be a $500 billion investment to get machines or networks of machines that will require nuclear power plants to operate, to do things human beings do with 2,400 calories of input every day. Write poetry, write code, build things, imagine futures, teach, reproduce. Well, I mean, so I think linking the future socialism to the further growth of the productive forces is that's not the problem it was in the 19th century. Now we need to slow down, do less, use what we have to free our time from alienated labor, and then distribute it in some non-alienated labor as we see fit. Hunter, fisher person, critical critic after dinner, as Marx said.
I don't want to keep talking, but I'm going to until someone else raises their hand, I guess. But Matt Vidal, in his really interesting book, Management Divided, recently he adopts a very orthodox, optimistic view of the development of the productive forces. All right, going against labor process theorists and the sort of de-skilling thesis of Braverman, which is kind of the obverse of automation, right? But yeah, he's saying, the development of productive forces, it also involves the development of the capacities of labor, right? And this is a progressive socialization of labor. And in an absolutely amazing short piece, the economist Cedric Durand raises the point that what if it's regressive socialization? What if the socialization of the productive forces doesn't give you any net benefit, right? And so I think you can be a productive force versus person who gives primacy to that without necessarily endorsing the progressive socialization thesis.
To say that in concrete examples, which is all I got, right? A lot of my chapter really just focuses on so much data entry, right? Including programming in one sense. And in that way, I mean, Marcuse has a version of this, as you know, too, which is just this kind of, what is it we're doing that we're calling skilled is the kind of tack I take here. I got another tack on this in my second book is like, so what do we mean by labor? And that's, a time-honored question too. And if it in fact is not hunting and fishing at all in Critical Critics After Dinner, and yet we're celebrating as skilled or humanizing something that is in fact very dehumanizing, we have a nomenclature problem.
Let's keep going with that question about labor because we're circling around it. I want to suggest at least three ways that we can approach it. One is the maybe most concrete empirical question of how does automation impact specific workers in specific industries? We've talked about software engineers. We've talked about our own labor of teaching. We might counterpose what we think about that to the mainstream discourse around automation, the entrepreneurial rhetoric of innovation, the raising of productivity, and so on. And what do we want to say in response to that? So that's one level. Another, of course, is about the central Marxist concept of socially necessary labor, average labor, what that all means for questions of value, for what does automation mean for a labor theory of value or a value theory of labor? Is the concept of value even conceivable in a fully automated or almost fully automated capitalism? And then there's the third, we might say that level of the question is at the mode of production. And then the third most abstract level would be maybe the philosophical or even anthropological one, and would lead us to Marx's, famous analogy of the spider who can put any architect to shame, but is in a way fundamentally flawed insofar as it cannot think about what it is doing, cannot conceive of its labor. Only human beings can do that, says Marx, and that gives a certain dignity to labor. Conversely, it also explains for Braverman, who's come up already, why human labor can be degraded and de-skilled. So do we need this ethical, anthropological concept of labor just to describe the kind of impoverishment or alienation of human labor that automation might affect? So given those three levels, I'd just like to ask, what do you think is essential about a Marxist concept of labor for thinking critically about automation? Or what might we need to rethink about this concept and reevaluate about it?
Yeah, on this point of values and AI futures, I mean, I was kind of thinking of James' conclusion chapter, kind of like this thinking about what would happen if the robots did everything. I mean, technically, I mean, if you had let's say a single worker, whose only job it is to oversee the systems and to push the buttons, that person would be hypothetically the producer of all of the surplus value. It would just mean, extraordinary levels of, inequality. And that gets us back to, Jeff's earlier point of like, we don't really have to, produce more and more use values because, the current system already supplies it. It just doesn't distribute it really well. And then the last point I want to make, the Peter phrase for futures scenario, where, we should not only think of the technological abundance, the overproduction of use values, but also the diminution of the ecosphere because of, climate change and the warming planet, where actually it could push us more into a scarcer allocation of resources. That goes beyond what we try to argue in the volume, but I think ecology should be thought together with technology.
Right, as we always did, or as Marx always did, because he's excited about fertilizer, and then it's like, ooh, right, oh gosh, maybe not. And I think that plays through our experience of it when we talk about general technology, as opposed to when we sort of focus on one in a particular context. I was just going to say, I've toyed with, I don't think I wrote down sort of like replacement labor concepts, activity, creation, sounds a little theological, trying to sort of tease out the different features of what we might try to use if we're going to refer to this just kind of rich humanist concept about labor. I think it's essential to think about.
I don't know about y'all in Europe, but virtually every day I'm blanketed with marketing emails promising to reduce the amount of work I have to do as an academic. Does anybody get those kind of emails? Automate your grading, your comments, your feedback, providing us canned content that we can deliver online. In fact, I'm being forced right now to do an online training. And one of the things they're having us do is to assess our online, it's called a module. And I write about this in my chapter for accessibility. And we're forced to use AI to assess how accessible particular parts of the Canvas page are. And since we're looking at automation and algorithms from a Marxist perspective, I want to bring this back to something that we really haven't been talking about, and that is that Marx, to remind everyone, Marx talked about how you can write a history of technology in the class struggle. And for me, the question of whether robots will take our jobs is a hyper marketing gimmick that a lot of these AI companies are pushing on us. What's actually happening is a lot more subtle. This technology is being used to rationalize and break down the work that we do so that particular parts, components can be automated. And, these AI being used to grade and post comments to our students through these online shells in themselves as part of the process of standardizing the work that we do to understand how it can be dismantled so that we lose control over more and more of the labor that we do. And in this way, I just think of AI or algorithmic management tools as just a very sophisticated steam shovel, as Jeff was talking about earlier. Every technology in itself is a response to the power of workers and our ability to organize to disrupt capital's imposition of work on us. And we have to start from that point. If we're going to be useful as Marxist academics, we really have to start with, why are these technologies being introduced? What is it about the way that workers self-organize to resist work means that capital needs to restore control by imposing new forms of technology, whether it's a pen, a pencil, or the telephone or the telegraph, or automobiles or trucks or trains or AI. And so I want to make a plug for, as a Marxist, approaching this question from the perspective of class struggle.
Yeah,
I
I
couldn't
would
agree.
like to. I don't know who started talking at the same time. Should I continue?
Yeah, go ahead, Christina.
Okay. Yeah, I'd really like to pick up on that you said, Robert. I I think AI, I used to work doing AI applications. And of course, we have the impression that AI is automated technology when we use it, but it's not really. It's dependent on so much manual labor. And I mean, we could talk about that in terms of theft. Also, today, you can have different opinions about whether this information should be free or whatever. But it's actually, it's really, really not automated technology. And these these visions about AGI, maybe it's an interesting topic to kind of take off from in discussions, but I'm not sure it's a good place to start to analyze technology or automation from a Marxist perspective and what it's actually doing now. Yeah.
I just wanted to echo what Robert said. I think that is really important. And I think, Jesse, the question you posed, maybe just stating the obvious, but I think that goes back, I think, to Capital Volume 1, where Marx is talking about new technologies from a point of view of whether or not they really liberate human beings from unnecessary toil. And I think that has to be, I think, the basis for any way you approach questions about new technologies or not. And as someone who worked on Gunther Anders now for years, he was well known, still well known for many of the kind of nightmare scenarios he envisioned regarding technology, and he really thought that that was the responsible thing to do, to think scenarios through that those are the worst possible situations in terms of a type of technology, not least for him the nuclear weapons. But I think Christina is also kind of pointing out, I think it's been pointed out by a few people here, that cannot really hinder understanding. In that, if you're really just beginning from the point of view of the worst it possibly could be, you can really miss how capital is utilizing technologies to really reimpose control over workers and over the process of work itself. Thanks.
And Christina, if I could just say, your work is excellent about this, sort of like the false promise that automation is going to happen without all of this human labor denied and disavowed, seeming it together all the time. I thought that was really excellent.
I agree with everybody there, but may I say something that is from the opposite spectrum, end of the spectrum, which is talking about the definition of labor, as Amy was. So the chapter that we wrote conducts a sort of thought experiment, which is not testing the empirical future of AI, but testing the theory of labor theory of value. And the thought experiment is that, say you had a machine, an AI in a body of some sort, so an AI in a cyborg body or an android body, you're going to call it, that is functionally identical to a human in its performance. It can do anything a human can do. Now, if you place it in identical social relations, i.e., you proletarianize it, so it's doubly free in the same sense that a human being would be, right? It's free of compulsion, so it's not a slave, and it is free to what's the other sense of free? It's free of ownership of the means of production. So it has to sell its labor to continue. And if you also assume that it has upkeep costs, like a human to some degree, has to buy upgrades or energy or something, then we argue then functionally the law of value would still apply, and it would apply to a machine, which is contradictory to the whole history of Marx. So, what's the conclusion of that? I don't know, but it does call into question the and we, by the way, we do not call for dismissing the law of value or the labor theory of value. We think that's they're true, but this thought experiment to us leads to some interesting results, such as the idea of a proletariat, machine proletariat, which would then be in competition with the human proletariat. And so you just have to start reading science fiction novels at this point to think through these sort of scenarios.
But two quick points to that, but it kind of connects back to the bigger conversation we're having. I mean, capital doesn't replace labor because they fetishize technologies, but because technology saves money. If your cyborg workforce is still going to cost the capitalist money, are they going to undertake the types of investments necessary to create that level of technological cybernetic sophistication? The second, a philosophical point, would those things be machines, or would they be artificially living creatures that are kind of ethically identical to human beings and therefore political as well? But that's a kind of more philosophical point. But I think on the political economy point, if you still have to pay them, why would you produce them? Just
Presumably
labor to exploit.
Presumably, they don't have to sleep or go to the toilet, which Amazon would love, right?
Right.
In its warehouses.
But they would need to plug in and stuff, wouldn't they?
I mean, yeah. I mean, it depends on the capacity of the android body, I guess. Really getting in the weeds here.
Yeah.
Jeff, can you remember, is it Marx or Althusser who calls that the hidebound aspect of technology? Anybody remember? I cannot.
I'm not sure.
There's somebody important who calls that the hidebound aspect of technology. So there'll be the selective development of technologies, and only if they're profitable. Otherwise, it's just going to let me not go to the bathroom and not sleep and burn through me.
Interesting term. I don't know it.
I know it, but I know and I don't know at the same time.
Stefan, you wanted to add something?
Are they also going to consume? Because you also need someone to consume.
Yes. Well, I mean, they're going to need energy, and presumably they're going to be engaged in a constant race of upskilling, which would be, hardware upskilling as well as software upskilling. So presumably they'd have to buy these new parts, they have to buy new software, expand their RAM or whatever.
Okay. Are they going to? Is advertisement going to work on them?
I think so. Why not?
Because I mean, I was recently. I think this was also going the rounds in social media, where someone was punished because he automatically generated music for Spotify, and then he had bots listen to the music. So he automated production and consumption as well. But obviously he was punished because there wasn't this. I mean, it generated hits, it generated advertisement being watched, but the bots aren't going to go out and consume other things. They weren't influenced, so that part of the money-making process doesn't work. But to me, that's fascinating to think that you could have automation for the consumptive part, and then you'd have a complete machine, in my opinion. At least if you could still generate money.
I think that story is extremely relevant for Marxist theory of technology, and my colleagues and I have been talking about it. Somebody needs to write something about that. I think you're right to talk about that story.
I would just ask, what is the purpose of technology and capitalism if there's no need for people to do any labor or to consume anything? I think we're getting off the track of a Marxist analysis. The point of Marxism is to understand how capital extracts value from control of human labor. If human workers aren't needed anymore, and we're not able to consume anything, kind of like in that film, The Elysium. I don't know if anybody's seen that. We become just extraneous. We become redundant. Do we really have capitalism anymore? I think we're kind of getting off of Marx when we start talking about closing the loop in that way. I really have to take a stand against this direction in the argument, because it's really eliminating the value of Marxism for understanding why automation is being introduced. What's the point of it? My classes are filled with students that are going to end up going into service jobs. Many of those jobs manage them remotely through a black box. Many of my students right now are Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, and they work fast food. I have a super majority. I teach at a school that's super majority students of color, first generation college students. Their families are also being managed by algorithms. If we're going to go off into a philosophical, dystopian view, it kind of eliminates the value of what this book is supposed to be contributing, which is to understand why technology is being introduced to discipline and manage labor. In our classrooms, we're having this technology pushed on us to train and discipline our students to be managed by these technologies. This is real stuff. People are being exploited, and their lives are being destroyed through the use of these technologies in the workplace. And for me, the value of this volume is to understand how these technologies are being introduced in order to manage and reproduce the class relations. Capital can't escape that contradiction. And I think we're going off far afield from Marx when we talk about that.
I mean, fair enough, but why, for instance, then is Facebook now intentionally introducing bots into its social network?
Well, I think Christine answered that question earlier. There's a lot of hidden labor in AI. And I'm sorry, Christine, I haven't read your chapter yet, but it looks really fascinating. And there's emerging research on how AI has a global shadow work supply chain that goes all the way to Africa, where you have thousands of workers who are being paid literally pennies an hour to scour that feed of data. So let's not get caught up in the hype about how these big tech companies have automated everything. I mean, remember, Facebook just laid off 5% of their workforce. They're a global corporation and they rely on subcontractors all over the world to do all that hidden labor. And a lot of that work is being done outside the global north. And if we don't understand that global supply chain of AI data scrubbing that's going on, for example, then we're really not understanding what role this technology plays in capitalism today. They can't get rid of human labor. Otherwise, they get rid of the entire point of capitalism, which is to maintain control over the population by imposing work on us. So, I think it's important to really dig deeper than the marketing hype.
I guess the thesis is that you could get rid of humans, but not labor, is the speculative thesis. You could change the substrate labor. Capital depends on a substrate made of some sort of matter. But
Yeah, I think sci-fi has pretty much warned us about how the robots can destroy humanity. I think that's the ultimate, nuclear option, if you will. But right now, I think very subtly, things have not really changed that much fundamentally from when Marx wrote Capital. Technology is being used to control and impose work. Capital can't get rid of human labor. Otherwise, there's no point anymore to that economic system. That system will collapse, and it can't maintain control. It's a zero work compendium. The paradox of zero work. Capital can only continue to replace human labor up to the point where it no longer needs human labor. Then we don't have capitalism anymore. What do we replace it with? That's the question, because it's destroying our planet before it actually gets to that point of the zero work paradox. And if we don't figure out how to replace it, this is all pointless conversation anyways, just to be a rabble rouser here. But capital needs us. The question is how much human labor is involved in the automation process, and I think it's really important that we have a global perspective on understanding that supply chain.
Yeah, I would say that Robert is certainly right at the macro level. I think that there's a lot of economies that are saying they have labor shortages, that there's a continuous need to increase the total size of the labor force. But I would add that for specific sectors of the economy, it is very much feasible to do automation. So, like the AI sector, yes. I mean, you at the beginning phase, in order to train the algorithms, you need to have the human laborers. I think the Time article that you refer to mentions, I think, Kenyan data labelers that are, overexploited, underpaid. But once you have, trained up the algorithm, would the labor intensity for that specific sector of the economy still be the same? I would say no. I think that the whole point of training and labeling this kind of data is to automate at a later stage, and that's kind of the argument that I was trying to make with the Amazon warehouses, that the beginning phase, yes, it's about overexploitation of labor, and in the later phase, it is about replacement of labor.
All right, thank you very much also for the controversy that was just entering the debate. I would like to now give the audience a chance to also ask some questions or comments if you've read the book or some of the chapters. So please use the little icon to raise your hand if you can. It's under reactions, I think, in the latest Zoom version. And apologies for my cat, he's really hungry.
That's so funny. I thought it was my cat. I've been looking around.
I should have known, but I didn't want to feed him at like 5:45.
Hey, this is a multi-species event. The cat wants to jump in the conversation.
Or maybe comments, questions that you have for each other. That would also be an option.
I would just like to say that your introduction chapter that you guys composed is probably one of the best pieces on Marxism and technology that's out there, and it's going to be a go-to to signing to students for me. So honestly, really well done. It's so comprehensive.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Miriam.
Yeah, I apologize for having to turn my camera off. My internet connection is not a good one. I wanted to just actually ask Christina, your chapter sounded really interesting about this hidden labor, also, from the background of what was just being discussed as now. And I don't have really a specific question. I haven't had the chance to read the book yet, but I was wondering whether you might, in light of what was just said now, develop more on what your chapter was about. I understand that in many ways it's about the hidden labor of automation, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam, for the question. So I think like my basic argument is that I try to argue that like our conception of technological efficiency in relation to automation, but also to like technological solutions to problems in general, that conception of what efficiency is quite narrow. And we use it to discuss saving of labor time often, at least from when this Marxist, from a Marxist point of view, like what's actually saving labor time? What does it mean? And maybe lucky for me, I wrote most of that chapter before the LLMs were actually released. I think it would have looked a bit different otherwise, but it's a very good example of how efficiency is conceived by a user versus how much manual labor that has to get done to develop, for example, an LLM or any technology, really. So, I mean, an elevator is also some kind of automated system. Maybe we don't use that term automation, but all technology automates or converts energy somehow. And I mean, the amount of manual labor that's present in these on a macro level in these developments are huge. And we don't see it because it doesn't cost very much to hire someone who labels stuff and who gets paid, I don't even know, like maybe a cent for 10 images, or I don't know. And often we do it for free. I mean, we haven't really discussed that, but we also produce this information. We are very occupied now producing information to feed to these large language models. And it feels maybe voluntary that we use these platforms and we interact and we send each other pictures. But I lean heavily on, I think she's an Australian sociologist. Her name is Judy Weissman. I'm not sure how to really pronounce her last name, but she's done time studies. So she studied people who she's asked to keep time diaries. And she can just see that when you introduce digital technologies in the workplace or in your home, it starts to actually shift time and labor around. So we shift our own time around, and we shift time around between groups also. And lots of modern technology just hides this manual labor that has to be done somewhere else. And we haven't even discussed energy, for example, which is also labor somewhere. So yeah, I tried to discuss efficiency, technological efficiency. Sorry for rambling on.
Thank you very much. Okay, James has to leave, unfortunately. Any other pressing questions from the audience or from the panelists, contributors? Felicia.
Hi. Thank you, everybody. I mean, it was really interesting to hear about the chapters. I'm really excited to read the book. So a couple of things came up during this discussion that I would like to hear your thoughts on. One was sort of this, like the idea of like sort of an alternative conceptualization of labor in like this post-Fordist moment. So activity, I think, was mentioned by Amy. Christina, I also feel like I like hear a lot of people trying to conceptualize audience labor, free labor, and like prosumers, like this sort of changing categories, while people trying to like sort of like update like Marxist categories. And a part of me feels a little bit like suspicious of these sort of efforts, but on the other hand, I also see like a lot of the motivation behind it. And I'm kind of curious what people feel about these kinds of efforts, and like whether there is sort of a methodological need to go beyond some of these sort of traditional terms that we are familiar with. And yeah, so that's kind of my really broad question.
I can't help but talk. Talk, so you have to shut me down. I mean, there is enormous political power potentially in naming something labor that wasn't named labor, which of course we know from feminism centrally, right? So I did write this down. I have something called labor is said in many ways. It's an Aristotle joke, but the truth is it is said in many ways. And I think these efforts to specify because of its political power to name something as labor that maybe wasn't, or to talk about what Christina's talking about, which is we all carry these data entries devices and we give in data free of charge all the time, right? I think I applaud the efforts to try to call out where labor is occurring free of charge, even if it does require a kind of specialized vocabulary. I'm curious about the skepticism.
Yeah, I think that like there's like I know that like some of these like sort of work is coming from like sort of like Italian Marxist traditions. Like sometimes new materialists have this like criticism of like Marxist efforts. So yeah, that's like a broad, it's a really general skepticism. But I hear your point there.
Mm-hmm. I think the legibility of labor is how I think it's really powerful to think about this, but right? So can we make labor that was illegible, like this literary metaphor, legible in cases? And in Christina's work, you know, I at the end of my chapter, I'd have this example. It's extended about a calendar programs and how they pretend to talk to each other, but the truth is we're just all seaming them together on our little devices, and that's that sort of invisible labor pressed into service. And I think that the metaphor I like best is making it legible as labor, to think about it.
So before we go, I wanted to make sure we had a moment at least to think about the future, given that it's in the title of the volume. Now, I'm totally on board with using Marxism as a critique of capitalist technology. It's essential. We cannot do without that. But there's a other tradition, of course, which says, as to quote the German ideology, communism is the real movement that abolishes capitalism. So unless that we imagine that communism means we're going to start over from zero with brand new technologies, we're going to inherit some of this stuff that we've been critiquing from capitalism. And I think about this. I was thinking about this morning in my own work. Like many of us, I'm dealing with ChatGPT and how it's transformed student essays, and I absolutely loathe it. I hate it. I wish it would go away. I wish I could destroy it. I wish this technology had never been built. But I don't know. Is there something in it? So I have to ask myself, is there some sort of mystified, highly mediated form of the common in this technology? Is there something like a communist chat GPT possible or even desirable or anything else? Are there any other technologies that are negation notwithstanding point in some way toward repurposing, point in some way to a world after capitalism? Of course, they would have to be transformed, but is there a kernel there?
I mean, my essay was kind of focused on the future, and it's called something "Sociality is the Heart of Socialism" or something. And I think that gives me a way into your question. I think it's not so much the technology, but the social relations. But what I worry about is not the nightmare scenarios. Granted, they may happen, right? Maybe the robots will take over. But I'm more concerned about how the development of things like artificial intelligence are changing our understanding of our own intelligence, right? And the problem with ChatGPT, I mean, I'm dealing with it with my students as well. All of us are, I'm sure. It doesn't think. I'm not denigrating the word. I mean, it's an extraordinary mathematical statistical creation, right? But it doesn't think. I mean, I teach philosophy. If you're not interested in thinking through those problems, the machine doesn't do it. It will give you a very flat, very one-dimensional, but extremely competent, right? You can tell when ChatGPT has submitted the thing, but it's hard to, prove. But my point is, we have to, I mean, socialism for me is about an emancipation of human energies, right? Now, we might want to use all sorts of technologies to free some time for some things, but we don't want to lose connection to the material connections between ourselves and other people, right? I mean, if technology has any value, it's that it enhances and develops that. Case in point, we're able to meet without spending thousands of dollars all coming to Berlin. As fun as it would have been to come to Berlin, right? I'd rather go to Berlin than sit in my office here. But I mean, it's an extraordinary facilitation of intellectual, philosophical, political, economic content. This is socialism in a sense, right? Free exchange of ideas between people who have something to share. But my worry is with the post-work people, Bastani and so forth. They've lost sight of the social essence of socialism. And Bastani says flat out, in his techno-communism, whatever he calls it, we'll all live the life of billionaires. Hello? That's what socialism is about? Everybody living the life of billionaires? I mean, that's my main concern, right? And I think that's a bigger danger than the robot apocalypse. Granted, that might happen. But anyway, they're kind of. I hope that speaks to your point.
Yeah. So on to that point, I mean, so the debate about this, ChatGPT and AI usage is not merely about intellectual displacement of our labor activities, but also laziness, right? So the fact that for us as researchers and our students are less likely to engage with the material and learning by doing effectively, and instead they just learn how to input the prompts and copy paste the output. And I think that could be a serious issue. I mean, like if you take, for instance, the autopilot in airplanes, right, which works 99% of the time, but in the 1% that it malfunctions, and then the pilots, have to take over again, and maybe they forgot some of the buttons that they have to press. And so that is really a concern, that we're not using, the full human functions that we have.
For me, I mean, I'm a public school teacher as well, and for me, ChatGPT is, for me, it's actually an opportunity because, at least in Germany, we're teaching standardized text to our students. Basically, they learn how to do certain tasks, standardized tasks, write standardized forms of text, and ChatGPT can already do that better. So it doesn't make any sense we're teaching them all that. Instead, this is my hope, we could go back to a more teaching students how to ask questions, how to situate themselves in the world, how to think critically about a problem. So in that sense, I think, because as already been said, ChatGPT doesn't think in a way that there's a discourse, there's an in-between, there's different questions being asked. I mean, you ask a question and you get a response, and that's it. And so for me, I think, and that's similar to maybe other workplaces. There's new technology, and then you have to think about how you're going to deal with that. And that, I think at that point in education, we are at that point right now again, where I know they're probably going to restructure education in Germany. They're going to go a different route because it doesn't make sense to teach students something they're not going to need in the workplace. But what are they going to teach? Are they going to go back to a more traditional education canon kind of thing? Are they going to make it illegal to use ChatGPT at school? Or like I'm in the teachers union, and I think it's important to push for more critical thinking, more open discussions, and more maybe personal philosophical questions at school, to go back into thinking about things instead of standardized text forms or whatever. So and that's in other workplaces as well. You're confronted with new technology, and then as workers you need to think about, like, how are we going to deal with this, and how can we use the opportunities that arise. So for me, that's my approach.
Maybe we can open this a little bit further with, or redirect it slightly with a question that just came in from Brian in the chat, and that's about the role of labor and technology in relation to degrowth. And he mentioned Saito, but there are others, of course, who have talked about degrowth, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. So, yeah, what's the role of technology and labor in degrowth?
Well, I mean, that very much fits with the point that I mentioned earlier with, thinking ecology together with technology. And I mean, unfortunately, I mean, yeah, I was once asked this question. I mean, could we have, a stable political system within capitalism without economic growth? And clearly, I mean, the answer is no, right? I mean, you see a slowdown in economic growth, you see a rise in populistic forces in all over Europe and now in the United States as well. So clearly, I mean, it's not a stable political system if the capital accumulation is impeded. So, I said, like, from the historical experience, that kind of like the feudalist non-commodified economy is the one that would be stable at zero growth. Now, I'm not saying we should go back to a feudalist system. I think we are all desiring a socialist reorganization of the economy, but kind of like a degrowth development, I think, is only feasible if the kind of private property capitalist system is overcome. And how to get there, of course, that's what we're all trying to figure out, right?
I mean, I think the Saito work is fantastic. I changed something in the German edition of my book based on what he said. The first one, and trying to get your imagination around the kinds of technologies that would be at play in degrowth is, I think, the really tricky part, because of course, so much of our imagination of technology is in the capitalist social form. So that it's there's this wonderful example in Andy Feinberg's book of, you built up a machine based on that only fits children's bodies, so only children can do the work. Well, some elements of that machine are still technologies, but taken not as put together, but like the brick, say, for example. Well, we're still going to use some elemental pieces of technology, ceramics, in degrowth scenarios. It is just tough to get your mind around what those non-capitalist technologies would look like.
Yeah, I think it's an important question. I also really like the work of Saito, but I think it's it would be a mistake, right, to essentially ask this question and to frame it as either technology or no technology, right? You can't do that. You'd have to, as Amy, as you said earlier, you'd have to look at empirical examples. And as I was thinking of the work of a German scholar and activist who's called Andrea Vetter. She's not a Marxist. I think she essentially treats Marxism basically as this Promethean thing. With Saito, we could say, well, that's maybe not justified, but anyway, she does that. But in her book, she provides what I think she calls something like a matrix for convivial technologies, which is this multi-dimensional table essentially with different categories. And I think that's really useful as a starting point to basically to see that these technologies, we cannot just look at them from one angle, but we'd have to see how they basically can be integrated in non-capitalist social relations, right? That's what it's about in the end. And to also keep in mind ecological factors, for instance, as you pointed out, Larry, or you, Christina, when you said we haven't spoken about energy yet. But I think that would basically be the task. And I think the interesting thing, of course, would be to say, how can we make sure that this stays Marxist, as it were, right? That if we come up with these categories and criteria to think about how certain technologies could be integrated into solidary social relationships, sustainable ones, and all that. This is the kind of work that we might think about continuing.
Okay, I think that works pretty nicely as a closing statement, I would say. Yeah, thank you everybody for attending and taking the time to be here with us, and also the audience for bearing with us. Yeah, and get the book. However you can get your hands on it. It's quite expensive, but there's a digital version. So yeah. All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Take care, everybody.